Hello, Pastor Jack Horner at Trinity Lutheran Church, here for our Pastor's Bible Study, our Thursday morning Pastor Bible Study, where we are studying the Gospel of Luke. And now we're coming to the end. This is the last session of our Bible study, where we're looking at the closing chapters, beginning with chapter 22, the passion and death of Jesus. We're going to be gathering again and having a Bible study that's going to be online sometime in January or February. And we decided that we're going to look at the book of Acts. And we're going to continue that journey that we began with the gospel writer, the evangelist Luke, as he now continues writing about the growth of the early church in the first century. So let's begin. Chapter 22. Now the festival of unleavened bread, which is called Passover, was near. The chief priests and the scribes were looking for a way to put Jesus to death, for they were afraid of the people. Then Satan entered into Judas, as called Iscariot, who was one of the 12. He went away and conferred with the chief priests and officers of the temple police, how he might betray them. When they were greatly pleased and agreed to give him money. So he consented and began to look for an opportunity to betray them when no crowd was present. Then came the day of unleavened bread on which the Passover lamb had to be sacrificed. So Jesus sent Peter and John, saying, "Go and prepare the Passover meal for us, that we may eat it." And they asked him, "Where do you want us to make preparations for it?" "Listen," he said to them, "when you have entered the city, a man carrying a jar of water will meet you. Follow him into the house he enters, and say to the owner of the house, 'The teacher asks you, where is the guest room where I may eat the Passover with my disciples?' And he will show you a large room upstairs, already furnished. Make preparations for us there." So they went and found everything as he had told them, and they prepared the Passover meal. When the hour had come, he took his place at the table, and the apostles with him. And he said to them, "I have eagerly desired to eat this Passover with you before I suffer, for I tell you, I will not eat it until it is fulfilled in the kingdom of God." Then he took a cup, and after giving thanks, he said, "Take this and divide it among yourselves, for I tell you that from now on I will not drink of the fruit of the vine until the kingdom of God comes." Then he took a loaf of bread, and when he had given thanks, he broke it and gave it to them, saying, "This is my body, which is given for you. Do this in remembrance of me." And he did the same with the cup after the supper, saying, "This cup that is poured out for you is the new covenant in my blood. But see, the one who betrays me is with me, and his hand is on the table. For the Son of Man is going as it has been determined, but woe to that one by whom he is betrayed." Then they began to ask one another which one of them it could be who would do this. Okay, let's just take a quick look at this. Some really interesting things that are at foot. So it is the Feast of the Unleavened Bread, Passover. This is the main celebration. This is the Easter, if you will, of the Jewish tradition, where they remember God's Spirit the Spirit of death passing over all of the Israelites when they were in bondage in Egypt. This is a spring festival, continues to be a spring festival that took place on the 12th day of Nisan, sometime in April or in May. And there you would come to Jerusalem and you would participate in the temple traditions, and a lamb would be slaughtered and the meal would be shared to the whole family. Here is something to remember that about this festival. It's the sheer enormity of it. If you were ever to visit Jerusalem and to visit the old city, you would see, yes, it is a city, but it's a city by first century standards. It ain't that big. It's a city for that time. And during that time, they would have probably over 100,000 people or more who would descend on this town. Imagine Camp Hill having some festival. Now, Camp Hill has, what's the population of Camp Hill? Anybody want to guess? I'd say 8,000, right? About 8,000? Yeah. So roughly 8,000. Imagine if you had triple, quadruple that just descend for the religious festivals, all centered in one particular area, right? The Temple Mount. And the Temple Mount is big, it's grand, but not 100,000 grand, okay? So, and this is and this festival of Passover was one of 3 pilgrimage festivals where at some point in your life, as a faithful Jew, you wanted to come for these festivals. The other one being the Festival of Booths, and then the Festival of Pentecost. They're afraid of the people. They want to put Jesus to death, but they're afraid of the people. Well, we see here a disconnect between the religious authorities and the general population who is seeing this ministry of Jesus as something that is positive. You know, healings are happening. The deaf are hearing. The mute are speaking. The folks that have had evil spirits are being freed from that which held them into bondage. And you see this triangulation that occurs between the religious authorities, the betrayer, Judas Iscariot, and notice the other one, Satan, right? Satan entered into Judas Iscariot, one of the 12, who conferred with the priests. So this alliance now has come together for the first time. We've heard before in this gospel, right? They want to put Jesus to death. They want to put Jesus to death. They see him as a threat, and yet they don't have the pieces to be able to make it happen. And here in the beginning of chapter 22, the pieces now come together. And we see the difference between the traitor, Judas, who leaves the company of the 12 to go confer with the priests, and Peter and John, who are the ones that are given the responsibility, prepare this religious meal. And we get a little bit of a glimpse into what I've talked about you before. Like, we've talked about how the 12 disciples are the main followers of Jesus. And by main, I just mean they're with him pretty much 24/7. But we know that there are other believers in Jesus that are going around, right? We had the 70 go 2 by 2, right? We know that there are other people who have been traveling with Jesus on a regular basis. And now Jesus sends Peter and John in to prepare the Passover meal to go to a person who they don't personally know, or at least it doesn't say that they personally know, right? Because he gives them a description of how to figure out who it is. Luke doesn't share a name here, but Jesus knows who it is. This is one of those believers on the outskirts that Jesus is acquaintances with or friends with or are a disciple of, to then go to that place to be able to prepare the Passover, the Passover meal. I always thought it was kind of mysterious as a kid growing up, thinking, how does Jesus know there will be someone with a bottle of water, and what's is that prophetic? I think it's planned. I don't think it's necessarily prophetic. I think this is clearly a follower of Jesus, one of those hundreds or even thousands of people who are followers of Jesus, and they're going to go to his home, to that upper room, to be able to celebrate the Passover meal. With the institution, we see the institution of the Last Supper takes the place at the table. Now, this is going to be a reclining table. You're not sitting at chairs here with a nice long table. Michelangelo paints a beautiful picture, but probably nobody's on chairs. They would have been doing it the Greek and Roman way, which would have been reclining. So lots of pillows. You're sitting on the floor. The table is low, and it's if you ever had any sort of Middle Eastern fare or Ethiopian food, you know how that's served, right? Everything goes on the table, family style, grab, grab what you want. A lot of times using the bread as the fork, spoon, whatever. The bread becomes the utensil by which you grab the food and you're eating with your hands reclined at the table. We did this one time with our kids. It was a lot of fun. We had a well, we still have actually a kind of a low coffee table. We got all this Mediterranean food, primarily Greek. I mean, that's what you can get, and set all this potpourri of stuff out, and we all just sat around the table. It was fun. It was fun. Do it. Try it. Try it. The older I get, I'm the more concerned about being able to get up after the dinner. So I'm not. We did this years ago, when the kids were little. But it was really wonderful. Takes the cup and giving thanks. We know what he would have said, because Jewish people have been saying these prayers for 2,000 years, the Haggadah, passing them down from parent to child. Blessed are you, Lord our God, King of the universe, who has created the fruit of the vine. Isn't that beautiful? What a beautiful prayer. I mean, just, blessed are you, Lord our God, King of the universe, who has created the fruit of the vine. In the Passover meal, there are a number of cups, by the way, that have wine in them that you eat throughout the course of the meal. It is a long meal. It is a ritualized meal, so it takes some time to be able to do this. This is probably the second cup, just given the context in which they're talking here of when would be the appropriate time for Jesus to kind of, do this conversation about what this now represents. This is a new way of thinking about this Passover meal. The Passover meal was a meal of salvation, and now it's still going to be a meal of salvation, but it's going to be interpreted in a different way. And you see the sequence that Luke describes this with the reference to the bread. He takes the bread, he gives thanks, he breaks the bread, and he gives and hands out the bread. This is the same, if you look at the motions, it's the same motions as the feeding of the multitudes, the feeding of the 5,000, right? The same process, taking, giving thanks, breaking, handing out. We also see a foreshadowing of the sacrifice that is going to take place. This is my body given for you. Do this in remembrance of me. Past tense. Do this in remembrance of me. This notion of remembrance, by the way, is really pivotal to understanding what Passover is about, because it has the sense. It's not just about remembering something. Oh, I'm not supposed to do that. Remembering something in the past as a past event. When the Bible is talking about remembrance, especially in this context of Passover as well as the Last Supper, you're not just remembering something that happened in the past. There are some Protestant denominations that when they talk about communion, it's almost like play acting, right? Oh, let's do it the way Jesus did it. No. Remembrance in this sense is recounting what had happened and bringing it into the present. Remembrance is both a present act that is connected to the past that anticipates the future. Oh, that was good. That was really good. Sorry, that was... But that's it, for Luke, that's what's happening here, right? So it's not just about the past. It is about everything. It's about past, present, and future. And the word that he uses to describe this is covenant, right? A new covenant in my blood. Covenant is a relational term, right? It's a connection, a covenant, where both parties come together and say, this is what it'll be. The apostles, they're chosen to represent and to lead Israel, but that is expanded to all who believe. It's not just going to be about those chosen few. It will be about all those who believe. And of course, we know about Luke's expansive understanding of who that's supposed to be. Let's see, what else do I want to say here? All right, let's keep going. All right, let's keep going. A dispute. Oh, we didn't do that, right? No. Yeah. A dispute also arose among them as to which one of them would be regarded as the greatest. But he said to them, the kings of the Gentiles lord it over them, and those in authority over them are called benefactors. But not so with among you. Rather, the greatest among you must become like the youngest, and the leader like the one who serves. For who is greater, the one who is at the table or the one who serves? Is not the one at the table, but I am among you as one who serves. So again, the servant leadership, but also expansion of who's the greatest and who's in. For you are those who have stood by me in my trials, and I confer on you, just as my Father has conferred on me, a kingdom, so that you may eat and drink at my table in the kingdom, and you will sit on the thrones judging the 12 tribes of Israel. Simon, Simon, listen, Satan has demanded to sift all of you like wheat, but I have prayed for you that your own faith may not fail, and you, when once you have turned back, strengthen your brothers. And he said to him, Lord, I am ready to go with you to prison and to death. And Jesus said, I tell you, Peter, the cock will not crow this day until you have denied me 3 times that you know me. And he said to them, when I sent you out with a purse, bag, or sandals, did you lack anything? And they said, no, not a thing. And he said to them, but now the one who has a purse must take it, and likewise a bag. The one who has no sword must sell his cloak and buy one. For I tell you, the scripture must be fulfilled in me. And he was counted among the lawless, and indeed what was written about me is being fulfilled. And they said, look, here are 2 swords. And he replies, it is enough. This Satan who has attacked Judas, if you will, if you want to use that kind of way of thinking about it, or corrupted Judas, there is that danger, Jesus is saying, that Satan now is going to also attack the other disciples as well. But this is the first time that we see in Luke's gospel where one of the disciples now has finally gotten it, has finally understood that Jesus is about to die. Lord, I'm ready to go with you to prison and to death. So here we are at the end of this gospel, and we finally have where one of the disciples begins to see where this is going, right? And of course, he makes that famous comment, and then Jesus said, no, you're going to deny me. That even there, even the greatest of the disciples will fall short in a pivotal moment. Okay. Yeah.
What's the business with the swords?
Yeah. So why carry a sword? Well, one, it's interesting because you hear that the disciples are carrying swords, right? And the common sword that they were probably carrying would be like one of those Roman swords. I think they're like this big. It's a short sword. And you would carry it for protection, right, from animals, but also from bandits or something like that. So it's I guess they're Second Amendment people. I guess the disciples are. I don't know. I mean, they have 2. I mean, so they, clearly, some of them are on security detail. 2 of them anyway, out of the 12. I think because of what right before he says somebody, they're going to want to kill you, basically, right? So it makes sense that you now have this Jesus talking about, being sent out and having what you need, right? Having what you need. And they said, and so that I think that the reason that they said, well, look here, we have two swords. In other words, if there's going to be a rumble, right? If there's going to be a rumble, Jesus, and they're going to come after you, we've got ways to defend you. Yeah.
Is the story of the disciples carrying weapons corroborated anywhere else?
Well, Peter takes one of those swords and cuts off somebody's ear.
Same event in my life.
Yeah.
There's an NIV note that says that the Greek word for sword often appears in ancient travel accounts as something a traveler might carry. So that feeds
Right.
what you were saying
Yeah.
about sending the disciples out.
Yeah.
They were
Yeah. Well, and the sword is often, the sword is as a weapon, is a symbolic, if you will, of conflict, right, or animosity. And I think in that context, that fits with what the paragraph right before, where where there's the recognition that, wait, this is getting serious here. And you would have to figure that there's got to be I would imagine that there would be some intel that the disciples would hear about, that you have people that want to do harm to Jesus. I would imagine that, again, I'm going extra scriptural here, but, this is a relatively small religious community, a small country, if you will. And, just like in a small town, rumors fly. I would imagine that they would have some inkling. Peter makes his statement. It doesn't come out of thin air, and I don't think it's just because of what Jesus said, although that certainly applies to it as well. But I don't know. I would just think that they might have some sense, that they wouldn't be completely shocked that, wait a second, this is... Because keep in mind, the whole time we have Pharisees trying to trick Jesus. Well, what would you try to trick him for? Right? What's the end game of trying to trick Jesus? Well, blasphemy. Right? If he can say that, if he can be blasphemous, it's time to get the stones. Right? It's now we got him. So I would imagine that there is this growing unease that might have been happening. It's not all love, joy, isn't this great? There's got to be this unease that is beginning to be stoked with what is happening. In other words, they're living the moment, and as you know, there's sidebar conversations that are happening. There are people probably going up to the disciples and talking to them about a variety of things, whether they're supporters or against Jesus. Yeah, Judas knew where to go. Yeah, that's a good point. That's a really good point. It just doesn't show up and, oh, look, there happen to be all these priests here ready to do a deal with him, right? Yeah, there's a lot of stuff happening, a lot of intrigue, if you will, that are happening behind the scenes. Talking about Judas knew where to go, right? Judas knew where to go. Okay, let's keep going. That's great. Good questions. He came out and went as was his custom to the Mount of Olives, and the disciples followed him. He reached to the place, and he said to them, "Pray that you may not come into the time of trial." So see, that fits nicely, right, with the swords, right? Pray that you may not come into this time of trial. He withdrew from about a stone's throw, knelt down, prayed, Father, if you are willing, remove this cup from me, yet not my will be done, but yours. Then an angel from heaven appeared to him and to give him strength, and in his anguish he prayed more earnestly, and his sweat became like great drops of blood falling down on the ground. There have been studies, I guess, that can actually happen if you're under that much stress, that you can actually bleed through the skin. I imagine it doesn't happen a lot, but anyway. When he got up from prayer, he came to the disciples and found them sleeping because of grief. So again, the pressure is mounting, right? And he said to them, why are you sleeping? Get up and pray that you may not come into the time of trial. And then the crowd shows up, right? Judas comes leading them, approaching Jesus to kiss him, but Jesus said to him, Judas, is it with a kiss that you are betraying the Son of Man? When those who were around him saw what was coming, they asked, Lord, should we strike with the sword? Then one of them struck the slave of the high priest and cut off his right ear, but Jesus said, no more of this. He touched his ear and healed him. Then Jesus said to the chief priests, the officers and temple police and the elders who had come, have you come out with swords and clubs as if I were a bandit when I was with you day after day in the temple and you did not lay hands on me? But at this hour, the power of darkness. But this is your hour, the power of darkness. So it doesn't actually say here that it's Peter that grabs it, but just one of the other persons. So how do you persevere in times of trial? What we learn from Jesus is pray. Right? That's real good advice. When you're undergoing times of trial, make sure that you're even more closely connected to God, who can give you perspective on what that trial means. I mean, there's a lot of terrible things that people go through in moments of time, or even for seasons of time. But we can better understand them, and we can get through them, and we can see hope in them. We can see redemption in them because of being connected to God in those moments, because of our conversation with God in those moments. Now, I recognize when you're going through it, it's hard to see. And sometimes those prayers might be, God, where are you? Right? I'm trying to find you. I'm trying to see you, and everything is blurry, right? Because of the trauma of everything that you're going through. So sometimes it's in the perspective of coming out of that season to look back and go, there he was. It's kind of like that. I mean, I hate to use that image of the footprints in the sand, because it's been so overused, But yeah, it does kind of reign true. There's God, supporting us and helping us through those times. So this, in Luke's gospel, this time of testing that he's talking about here is this assault, this demonic assault, right? It's like the temptation in the wilderness. It's coming. And we know who's behind it. None other than the devil is behind it. Okay. And God's response to Jesus is not to remove the cup, right? Think about this. So God's response in Jesus' difficult situation is not to remove the difficult situation. Instead, It's to let him know that he is with him. But it doesn't take it away. It's still there. And that makes sense if you think about it, because what would happen if God said, you know what, you're right, I'm going to take this away from you. You're not going to have to go through this. What would that mean? What would that mean for you and me? We're not saved. There is no salvific moment on the cross. There is no resurrection. Right? We remain dead in our sins for all eternity. So there's a lot at stake in that moment. There's a lot of earnestness in Jesus' prayer. But he accepts it. He accepts it. Also notice that when Jesus is in the Mount of Olives, the Garden of Gethsemane, he's there because he has left the city, because remember what I said, you got 100,000+ people that are in the city, right? So he goes to a quiet place. So he's gone across the Kidron Valley, he's gone down through the valley, and now he's up on the side of the other mountain. So his view is of the Temple Mount. That's what he's seeing. That's what he's seeing, and he probably sees the torches that are lit and all that stuff. So when they come for him, he can see them coming. Clearly, you can see them coming. You see the parade of torches going down off of the mount, through the gate, down the Kidron Valley, and now they're coming up. And Jesus is on high ground. He sees them coming. And he's not hiding. Right? He doesn't go to the garden to hide. He is out in the open, if you will. They know where he is. Right? And the reason for that is because Jesus is the one in control of this event. They think they're in control of the event. They think everything is going exactly the way they planned it. But Jesus is the one who is in control. Then there's the moment where Peter denies Jesus, and we know that well from the reading that we have on Good Friday. I'm not the man. The cock crows. He weeps bitterly. The men who were holding Jesus began to mock. This is verse 63. Mock him, beat him. He's blindfolded. Torture was a pretty accepted practice for both probably for both the temple police as well as certainly for the Romans. The Romans, I remember when Mel Gibson's film came out, The Passion of the Christ, I remember reading an article, it was fascinating, about all of the different instruments of torture that the Romans had. I mean, they had names for every single thing, whether it was a rod or cat o' nine tails with like pieces of metal and glass and bone stuck in. I mean, it was really disturbing, that they had they had a full, 15 things they could use. Everything had a name. Everything had some purpose. Here, they're just, this is what happens when, evil takes control, whether it's a riot in a city where you see a beating happening. It's just people doing things that they maybe they wouldn't normally do. At least God, we hope that, right? The next day, the assembly of the elders of the people, they come together, the Sanhedrin. He's brought to the council. If you are the Messiah, tell us. He replied, if I tell you, you will not believe, and if I question you, you will not answer. But from now on, the Son of Man will be seated at the right hand of the power of God. And all of them said, then you are then the Son of God? And he said to them, you say that I am. And when he said this, what further testimony do we need? We have heard it from his own lips. Which is interesting because he didn't say that, right? He said, you say that I am. I mean, I think Jesus is being really, as a witness on the stand, I think he's being pretty good and pretty, coy, if you will, about that. And of course, as you see, they hear it the way they want to hear it. Yeah, okay, he says he's the Son of God, the Son of Man or whatever. The Son of God. That's it. That's enough. We have enough. So then they bring him to, before Pilate, because they do not have the ability to exercise the death penalty. That is something that the Romans had kind of taken away and given over just for themselves, and then give it out to whoever they want to give it out to. So they first take him to Pilate. Now Luke is giving us this scene that, there's blasphemy that's happening in this scene, but it's not Jesus. The blasphemy is that you have the religious elders and priests who are taking those words and twisting them to get the verdict that they want to get. That's the blasphemy. Jesus is the one who aligns himself with God's will, and they are the ones who have now aligned themselves not with the will of God, but instead of the will of the devil. Even though what they ask, if you're the Messiah, tell us. The devil did the same thing in the wilderness. 3 times tried to release, 3 times rejected. In Luke, all of the people are shouting. And we know where we have this sense of where it's going. So they go to Pilate. He's perverting the nation. He's forbidding to pay taxes to the emperor. He's saying that he is the Messiah, a king. Of course, that's going to be, strike the ears of Pilate. For many Jews had said that Pilate really wasn't a legitimate king. He was put in place because he was a sympathizer and active supporter of the Romans. And even though they've done good for the country, like rebuilding the temple, I still have not read anywhere where they've said, and they were Jewish, like the Pilates were actually Jewish. So they're not part of the people, if you will. Pilate finds out he's a Galilean, and he says, let's have Herod take a look at him. Herod, of course, happened to be in Jesus because it was the Passover, so he was going to be there for this big religious festival. And you get this, I love the portrayal of Herod in like movies and stories. It's very interesting, right? This guy was complete, lecherous, who's on trial right now? Giselle Maxwell, just bad to the core person, just really, really bad. Again, he gets mocked, beaten, but he sends him back to Pilate because he doesn't get the answers that he's looking for. So again, Pilate calls together the chief priests, the leaders. He's going to try to exercise Roman justice here. The Romans were known for not only their brutality, but also for their sense of the law and how the law is supposed to work. Of course, the law worked better for Romans and for Roman citizens than it did for everybody else. But they prided themselves on on bringing Roman law to all of their conquered territories. And so we seem that he has the same thing here. He doesn't seem to see anything that deserves death in his estimation, so therefore he will just have him flogged, which seems a little injustice if you don't think he did anything wrong. But, it's not innocent until proven guilty here. It's probably guilty until proven innocent. And, well, I think he's probably innocent, but tell you what, we'll beat him anyway and then just release him. That wasn't enough. Instead, they say, we want Barabbas, who was, it depends on the translation and how they want to do this. Was he a bandit? Was he a bandit who murdered someone? Definitely he was a murderer. Or was he a zealot? Part of the political folks that were against the Romans. It's a little hard to tell. And there was a mixture of, if you're going to be a rebel, you're going to need money for your stuff, to be able to do it. So how are you going to get money? Well, you're going to steal. So there's a lot of definitions of what exactly he was, and it's all kind of confused. And of course, 2,000 years, it's still a little confused what exactly Barabbas was. But clearly he was in prison because somebody died. So he's in there for murder. And they have a practice of releasing a prisoner, and that's the prisoner that they want released. And so they do. Jesus is taken away. They seize a man, Simon of Cyrene. Here's another interesting little tell. I love these things, right? Why do we know Simon of Cyrene's name? Why does Luke know the guy's name was Simon of Cyrene? Because he might know Simon of Cyrene. Simon of Cyrene might be a follower of Jesus. In another gospel, the description of Simon of Cyrene is it's mentioned that, this is the father of Rufus and Alexander. Right? Oh, okay. Now, we don't know if Simon of Cyrene was a believer before Good Friday, but it certainly seems at least him and certainly his children are by the time the Gospels are written. The women are following, beating their breasts, wailing. This is what you do when somebody's being crucified, whether it's Jesus or anybody else. It's not a cause of celebration; it's a cause of crying. Jesus says, "Don't weep for me. Weep for yourselves and for your children," recognizing that this is a powerful moment. 2 other criminals are led. They're put to death with him. Now, they do this right outside the city gates. It's a nice little, it's the kind of sign that you would have outside. Hey, if you come in here, make sure you behave. They would do that by having dead people or suffering people on crosses. And it's a way of just saying, this is what we do to folks like that. They used to do that in the Old West too, right? Wouldn't they do that sometimes? And in the South, yes. Again, he's mocked as while he's up there, mocking him, offering him sour wine. If you're the king of the Jews, save yourself. And they also had the inscription, "This is the King of the Jews." One of the criminals, "Hey, if you're the Messiah, save yourself." The other is, "Don't you fear God since you're under the same sentence of condemnation?" About noon, darkness comes over the whole land until 3 in the afternoon. And this is interesting. The curtain of the temple was torn in two. Now, the curtain of the temple is the curtain that separates the Holy of Holies from the rest of the sanctuary. So, what Luke is describing here is something that is incredibly symbolic. The only person that was allowed to go into the Holy of Holies was the chief priest. And the chief priest was only allowed to go into the Holy of Holies for one day, for one specific ritual. So it's separated where God dwells with the rest of the world. That's the symbolism of it. The curtain being divided, being ripped into two, now symbolizes that God is no longer going to be contained. Right? God is now unleashed into the world, if you will, symbolically. Jesus' very last words, you could say, were his guiding principles throughout his whole life and his whole ministry. "Father, into your hands I commend my spirit." And that's how he lived. When he breathed his last, the centurion saw what had taken place, praised God, and said, "Certainly this man was innocent." Another little interesting kind of tell. Where would we get this information? Who talked to the Roman centurion who found, who relayed this? Again, I think it's interesting in that we see all of these little pieces of information that Luke is able to gather up from people. Now, one of the people of one of the men, Joseph, a member of the council, obviously a sympathizer of Jesus, and some would even say that he was a follower of Jesus, both him and Nicodemus. Asked to take the body down. You're not allowed to take it down until Pilate says so. They want to make sure that he's dead, take it down, and then put him in the tomb. And then we go to the 24th verse. On the first day of the week, at the early dawn, they came to the tomb, taking spices that they had prepared. They found the tomb rolled away from the tomb, but when they went in, they did not find the body. This is probably one of the most important sentences in all of Holy Scripture. Jesus was alive. Jesus was killed and is dead. And Jesus is not in the tomb. If you think about our own Christian faith and what our own Christian faith is based on, it's those three simple things. Jesus lived, Jesus died, Jesus rose again, and the tomb is empty. And it changes everything. It changes your perspective on life. It changes your perspective on death. It changes your perspective on despair and hope. That two men in dazzling clothes, we assume that these are angels. The women, of course, are terrified. That's why we think they're angels, because whenever an angel, shows up, everybody is terrified, appropriately so. Why do you look for the living among the dead? He is not here. He has risen. And then the little lesson, right? Remember when he told you, right, that this is what was going to happen. And they remembered his words, and returning from the tomb, they told this to the 11 and to all the rest. So Mary Magdalene, Joanna, Mary, the mother of James, and the other women with them who were told this to the apostles. But these words seemed to them an idle tale, and they did not believe him. In that time, women could not be used as witnesses in legal proceedings. And so they're being very, think about it. No. The Jesus that you might have seen dead and put into the grave, no, he's actually alive. And I can just imagine if it was me with the disciples, there would be that sense of, oh, you poor ladies, the practicality would kind of set in, right? And just, my heart goes out to you. I know this is hard, it just seems that way. But, right? But Peter gets up, he runs into the tomb, stooping, looking, he sees the linen clothes by themselves. He went home amazed at what had happened. It was like, okay, now I'm really confused, right? He might have been one of those going, don't worry about it. But he's still, okay, fine. I know you're upset. I'll go check it out too, right? We get a beautiful story, and this is the only place where it is, of two disciples, and it doesn't say that it's the 12, but it's two of those disciples who were regularly traveling with Jesus, going to a village, Emmaus. It's 7 miles from Jerusalem. They're talking to each other about everything that's taken place. Jesus comes with them and is walking with them, but they don't recognize him. Probably because it's, who knows? You don't expect to see somebody alive that if they're dead, you don't expect to see them. It's dusk, right? But it says, they don't recognize him. They say, don't you know what's going on? You were in Jerusalem. How would you not know everything that has taken place? And then basically recount, this is what the gospel is, right? Or this is what they expected to happen, and this is, he was a prophet, mighty indeed, and that they handed him over, they condemned him, they crucified him. We had hoped that he was the one to redeem Israel. And, oh, by the way, some of the women came and said, hey, he's not there. That he's alive. And we checked that out. And they said that they're alive. Now, it doesn't stop these two from going probably back to their homes and on their way to Emmaus, because, after all, how can this be anyway, right? How can this happen? So then he teaches them, tells them, shows them, this is always going to happen. This is always part of God's greater plan. He stays with table. He takes bread. He blesses it. He breaks it. He gives it to them. Did you see that before? And when that happens, then they get it. Then their eyes were open and they recognized him, and he vanished from their sight. And then this beautiful phrase, were not our hearts burning within us? I think that's such a beautiful description of how Scripture and how Jesus can affect people, right? Were not our hearts burning within us? Not when they recognized him, by the way, right? Being in his presence and having him teach them. Were not our hearts burning within us? They immediately go back to Jerusalem and say, rush back to Jerusalem, find Peter. This is real. This is real. And this is what happened. And again, these stories of these disciples and their interaction with Jesus post-resurrection are shared among the community, and ultimately they make their way back to Luke, who then writes it down into the story. So while they were talking about this, Jesus appears to them and offers them peace. What else could he offer in a very difficult situation, right? When you're in a traumatic situation, is there anything better that you could offer to another person than just saying, peace be with you? Yeah. They're still frightened. They're still terrified. They're thinking they're seeing a ghost. They're not sure what the heck is going on. And he even says, touch. See, it's me. To make the point, he even eats some broiled fish, right? Ghosts don't eat, right? Ghosts don't eat. So he wants to make it clear, I'm not a ghost, I'm not a specter, I'm not an apparition. It's me with a body, and oh, by the way, I'm hungry. Right? Let me have some fish. And again, he says the same thing. Hey, this is all there. It's all there in the Old Testament. Look where it says, this is what the Messiah is going to do. The Messiah is not going to be this great military general and king. It's going to be this. And see, look, it happened. It's happening. It is what is happening. And you are witnesses to these things. And I'm now sending upon you what the Father promised. So stay here in the city until you have been clothed with power from on high. Right? So you stay here in Jerusalem. And I'm going to send to you what I promised from the very beginning. Of course, he's talking about the Spirit. And Luke finishes his conversation with, he leads them out to Bethany, lifts up his hands, blesses them, and then he ascends into heaven. And they worshiped him and returned to Jerusalem with great joy, and they were continually in the temple blessing God. And so that's the story of the ascension. Let me just a second. I want to make sure that, yeah. So fourfold response: worship, return, thankful praise, and joy. Any questions? What's that? Oh, oh, thank you. Yeah.
I've always wondered why God allowed Satan to have so much power. The Old Testament, for the slightest disobedience, God zapped people. And even in the New Testament, with the husband and the wife that sold their stuff and then were bragging about it and everything, but then they kept some, boom, he zapped them. You know what I mean? And
Yeah.
I get it that it's all part of the plan,
Mm-hmm.
but I've always wondered about that.
Yeah. I would say there's probably less zapping than you might think. I know what you're saying, and I know those stories.
The Ark of the Covenant was
Yeah.
falling down. And
Yeah. No. I mean, there's definitely some of that seems like, oh wow, just God's wrath immediately just kind of comes down. I mean, that's an age-old question, right? Why is the devil allowed to do that? I mean, I guess what I would say is, again, keep everything in perspective, right? The devil is thinking that when he kills Jesus, it is his most ultimate victory. But it's not. Because in the crucifixion, the devil is seen as a brute, and a boring brute at that. He's the ultimate laughable character to ignore, because he's the kind of guy that thinks he's just awesome, right? And thinks he's the greatest, and he's not. Somebody said that what makes the devil what makes the devil such a laughable figure is his inability to take the joke. Right? Ultimately, the death of Jesus and the resurrection is the greatest joke on the devil. And he doesn't get the joke. And that's part of the reason why you see him then reacting so angrily and so violently. Right? Because he can't laugh at himself. He is the complete narcissist. And you might even say psychopath, right? I mean, it's all about him. And that's the beauty of Jesus. And Jesus' action is completely the opposite, right? Jesus dies not for himself, but for all of us. And I always think too, I know people like to throw out the devil, and the devil is alive and well, and da-da-da-da-da. And I buy it. But I always keep perspective in that, yes, there is terrible evil, and and the evil can be even, I don't even have a problem with being personified in like this person, if you will, of the devil. I get it. I understand it. And certainly the 20th century, anyway, we saw plenty. I can show you plenty of places where the devil seemed to be alive and well, right? But the devil still never going to win in those situations. It's never going to win. You know? In Revelation, it makes it clear, and this is like, our hierarchy usually good and evil, right? And we try to treat these like they are the same. There's good and there's evil, and they're not the same. God, who is good, is greater than evil, always. Always. And if you look at hierarchy of beings, the devil does not equal God. In Revelation, the devil as this fallen angel would be along the lines of another angel. And even in Revelation, it's the archangel Michael who defeats the devil and all of his armies, right? So he's not even like the top angels that God has, Michael, Gabriel, he's the devil's down here. It doesn't make it easier when we're struggling with evil, but it's not that they're not would co-equal. They're not co-equal. With equal. Yeah, they're not the same. Does that help? No. Go ahead, follow it up. Hit me with your best shot. Well, I mean, if you go all the way back to Genesis with the freedom of choice and the ability to be able to, you make your choices. I'll set up the guidelines to say, listen, don't, you can do whatever you want. Don't eat of the fruit of the tree. And of course, within 2 sentences, everybody's like, oh man, I bet that's really good. I mean, that is illustrative of kind of how human beings act, right? I mean, it just is. It's what we do. We're always looking for the out, whatever that is.
I think we're always trying to be God too.
Yeah, and there's a lot of that going on in that Genesis text, right? I mean, isn't that what the snake He's just afraid that you're going to be like him, right? You're going to love this. You're going to love that fruit. He doesn't want you to have it because then you'll be like him, right? You'll be like God. And that is the original. The original sin is not eating the fruit. The original sin happens before that, where you go, hey, I bet that's pretty good. It's coveting. And if you think about most of the big sins that happen, it's the coveting that happens before that. The coveting, I want your money, and then, you do you steal it or you kill the person for it. All those 10 Commandments are brilliant because they're all related. They seem like standalone things, but when you really, really look at them, it's a tangled, here it all is. These 10 commandments, these 10 laws that just kind of are right there. You can pretty much track everything back. It really is. I mean, I understand the separation of church and state, but it really is brilliant to have the 10 Commandments on display, whether it's on public land or not. But the point behind it is they really are, all of the laws that we have all go back to those. I mean, real estate law is all about stealing and coveting. It's right, and all that. I mean, they really do form the basis from which all these other laws come. So, all right. Thank you so much for being with us. And thank you for joining us for this Bible study, and we look forward to being with you once again in January or early February. Take care, and God bless.